So, a few months ago, I made a video about an old Kingdom Hearts myth. Specifically, it was about a now edited for correctness TV tropes claim that stated the first Riku battle in Hollow Bastion would be more difficult if you beat Riku in the duel on Destiny Islands. In that video, I also talked about my experience with early video game rumors and mythology, and people yelled at me for not getting to the point quick enough. This is your brain on YouTube Shorts. God forbid we take our time and reminisce a bit. Curmudgeonly creator commentary aside, I also offhandedly mentioned some other KH rumors and misconceptions in that video. And then, on the 3rd anniversary of my channel, I streamed a bracket of video ideas submitted by my viewers. The winner of the bracket, what we deemed to be the most fun idea, would be the topic I make a video about before 2023. And sure enough, that winner was a follow-up on and evolution of that Riku video, a compilation of a bunch of different KH myths, rumors, and misconceptions. It's the video you're watching. I should say, this video won't necessarily cover things that are in the same vein as that Riku myth. There will be some gameplay things that are shrouded in mystique or confusion, but we're also going to tackle some meta misconceptions and unsubstantiated rumors. And I'll also say up top, this is not meant to be me lecturing anybody or calling anyone a stupid idiot. I'm guilty of believing and even accidentally spreading false or unverified things about the series, so I'm just looking to correct the record. I'm just a guy, I am very much fallible, I just wanted to research and discuss things that we often get wrong about these games. I might even correct something incorrectly here, so let me know if I do. And we're not talking about opinions or interpretations. I'm not going to look at theories and pick them apart, nor am I going to quarrel with how people feel about certain characters. I can disagree with people's interpretations of Quadratum or who the Master of Masters is, but all of that stuff is still unwritten. Likewise, I really don't see a ton of merit to the Terra is dumb argument, for example, but it's really more a matter of people's opinions. My goal is to only deal with the facts today, whether I'm pulling from the games themselves or outside interviews from people involved in their creation. In the interest of fairness, we'll start off with some misinformation that I've been guilty of spreading, that being Mickey left Aqua in the Realm of Darkness for 10 years. Long before my time here on YouTube, this statement or a variation of it has been a popular and easy stone to toss at the rodent monarch, but it is admittedly unfair. Speaking for myself, I think I had conflated the ending of Birth by Sleep with 0.2 because I definitely don't remember thinking this between 2010 and 2017. But to set the record straight, here's the timeline. As you probably remember, Aqua did meet Mickey in BBS, and they did in fact team up during some of the game's final battles. The last they see of each other is in the Mysterious Tower after Mickey found Aqua drifting in the lanes between following their battle with Ventus Vanitas. After this, Aqua leaves the tower on her own to find a place to store Ven, and then fights Terra Xehanort and Radiant Garden, whereupon she falls into the Realm of Darkness. That is, Mickey has no idea where Aqua is after she leaves the Sorcerer's Loft. They wouldn't meet again until towards the end of 0.2, which is set right before the finale of KH1. They team up here once again until the two reach Destiny Islands and get separated courtesy of the Demon Tide. The two would not see each other again until KH3 a little over a year later. So therein lies the truth, really. Mickey did not know Aqua was in the Realm of Darkness for 10 years, but actually 1 year. Now, to me, 1 year in Hell is still pretty shitty, but inarguably less egregious than a decade of conscious abandonment. And there's even an explanation for Mickey not mounting a rescue mission during this year, the most chief of which is that these earlier games were not written with this plot point in mind. But in-universe, he does actually tell Yensid about it, or at least Yensid knows where Aqua is, judging from the recoded ending.
Yensid! I think we're finally close to figuring out where Ven's heart is!
Is that so? Then that leaves only Terra.
Furthermore, in the ending of 0.2, Riku scolds Mickey for not telling him about Aqua's situation sooner, and Yensid basically says that Mickey was in the right because it would have been too dangerous to go and get Aqua anyway.
Do not be rash, Riku. As Mickey told you clearly in his story, reaching the Realm of Darkness the first time was not a simple task. And even if we had found a way back in, regrettably, none of us possess the necessary means to get Aqua back out safely.
So, I'm really more inclined to give Yensid a harder time about this whole thing. Like, maybe that's true about it being too dangerous, but it sure sounds like he gave up really quickly without even trying to figure something out. I should also note, though, that in 0.2, Aqua does pretty much give Mickey permission to go without her.
Aqua! Go without me!
No,
And lastly, we should also note something that potentially plays the biggest part in this misconception, something Anti-Aqua says in KH3.
You abandoned me, that's what. Left me in this shadow prison for more than a decade, knowing what it would do to me.
So this definitely makes it sound like Mickey left her there for 10 plus years, and this line, I'm sure, also informed my and many other people's stances on this matter. But given that it straight up isn't true given the evidence we've looked at, I think the quote is better understood as, you found me down here 10 years into my isolation and then you left me anyway knowing how long I'd been there. Not, you found me here 10 years ago and left me here ever since. I think that sentence could have used another pass because it's been really bad PR for Mickey.
It's finally over.
Let's cover another timeline-related thing while we're at it, the ages of some of the main characters. This one isn't really as prevalent as the last one, but especially in the aftermath of KH3 and Melody of Memory, there seems to be some occasional confusion regarding the age of some characters, with some folks claiming they're younger or older than they really are. It's pretty simple though. In KH1 and Chain of Memories, Sora and Kairi are 14 and Riku is 15. This information is most readily available in the instruction manual for the original release of KH1. Tetsuya Nomura actually said in an interview that you can consider Sora's birthday to be March 28th, the day of his screen debut. Now, by that logic, I guess everyone else who first appears in KH1 is also born on March 28th, but let's not think too hard about that. Anyway, Sora sleeps for a year and thus wakes up being 15 at absolute minimum. Obviously, Kairi is also 15 now and Riku is 16. Now, Coded and Dream Drop happen pretty soon after KH2. Mickey sends his letter to the trio about what he discovers during Coded in the epilogue of KH2. They then head off for the Mysterious Tower to start Dream Drop not long after. Of course, some amount of time could have passed between the trio returning to Destiny Islands and receiving the letter, but it's never outright stated. So we have no real reason to believe that the main trio aren't still the same age during KH3. In addition, the KH3 Ultimania also lists Sora's age during KH2 and KH3 as one and the same. During Remind, we're told that a year passes between Sora's disappearance and playing as Riku in Merlin's house, so from that point on, and during Melody of Memory, we can comfortably assume that Sora and Kairi are now 16, with Riku being 17. For the record, this also means that in Birth by Sleep, Sora and Kairi were 4 and Riku was 5.
Gosh, Sora, you sure are growing fast.
I guess.
Let's talk character themes. If you think of the three main trios, each character has their own track, right?
That's not true!
While each of the Destiny trio has their own track, as does each of the Wayfinder trio, as does Roxas and Xion, albeit in a fancier, longer, Frenchier title, Axel and or Lee does not have a self-titled character theme. This is probably most noticeable when playing Melody of Memory. Some fans attribute the track The 13th Struggle as Axel's de facto character theme, but this doesn't really work out perfectly. While the track does play for the first time when you fight Axel in Chain of Memories, it's reused for every other organization member in that game, minus Marluxia, as well as the first Ansem SOD battle as Riku, plus Luxord and Blackcoat Riku in KH2. It's more so a catch-all theme for one-on-one battles against organization members, which is probably why they changed it during that aforementioned Ansem fight for Recom. Axel sadly doesn't really have his own dedicated theme, though my personal pick would be the BBS debut, Eternal Moments. It's probably more accurate to call it a Lee theme since it only ever plays 3 times and only during scenes with Lee. Once when he meets Ven at Radiant Garden, and twice in KH3. First when he's talking to Kairi in the Secret Forest, and again when talking to Syx atop the Clock Tower.
Silly. Just because you have a next life.
While we're on the topic of music, there's also the peculiar case of the Days track called Xemnus. Not Xemnus, Xemnus, with a U where you'd think the A would go. This is how the track is listed on some official packaging of the soundtrack, although it's listed correctly on others. This inconsistency has led many to believe that the track was intentionally titled with the U for symbolic purposes. One idea that's floated around is that it's an intentional combining of Xemnus and Somnus, meaning sleep, but this originates from the fandom and not an official source. The only other idea I could posit is that the us would denote a group or collective, which is what the organization is, obviously. I think we're all Xemnus. In actuality, it's incredibly likely that it really is just a typo. The track's ISWC lists it as the correctly spelled Xemnus with an A and lists Xemnus with a U as an alternate title. ISWC, for the record, stands for International Standard Musical Work Code, and it's pretty much an identifier for musical works, not unlike the ISBN for written works. And yes, it is infuriating that the acronym ignores the M for musical. Of course, the ISWIC can still list things incorrectly or with typos, but given that the track's primary title is listed with the A and the alternate with the U, and the fact that it has appeared with the correct spelling on some packaging, I think Occam's razor would lead us to assume that it's always been a simple typo. Weirdly enough, by the way, the track never actually plays when Xemnus is on screen. It's used 8 times in the Days movie, and 6 of those times are one-on-one conversations between Axel and Syx. They do talk about Xemnus occasionally during those scenes, but that's about it. Anyway, big shout out to Kinode for helping me out with this one.
Indeed.
Continuing the music conversation, and this isn't one I see all the time, but Yoko Shimomura is not the only person to compose original music for the Kingdom Hearts series. She's definitely done the most, and she's definitely my favorite, but there are other people responsible for composing several tracks since Birth by Sleep. Namely, Takaharu Ishimoto is credited as the composer for tracks like Dice and Shine and Enter the Darkness, and Tsuyoshi Sekito for tracks like Black Powder, and Fresh Fruits Balls. The two would go on to compose several more tracks for Dream Drop, Union Cross, and KH3. In fact, of the new tracks on the KH3 soundtrack, Shimomura only composed 25%. Another big thank you, this time to David Russell, for these charts showing the distribution of who's responsible for how many tracks. For the record, there are even more people involved in the series' music, including other composers, but the three I mentioned are by far the most prominent.
A musical for everyone to have a lot of finny fun.
While we're on the topic of who's responsible for what, this might go without saying for some, or might be surprising for others, but Nomura is not the only person responsible for the plot and storylines in Kingdom Hearts. He is, in fact, the series director, and it's easy to use his name as shorthand when referring to any writing or story-related things, but there are definitely more people involved, including scenario writers Masaru Oka and Kazushige Nojima. This has been the case since KH1, and Nomura has never been the sole person responsible for every game's story or dialogue, though he is assuredly at the helm of the operation.
I'm the captain of the steamboat.
Now, a few KH3 things to address. Coincidentally, the first two topics here have to do with dark versions of our protagonists. Let's start with my least favorite member of the true organization, Dark Riku. Even after the ending of KH3, there seems to be some lingering confusion about who or what exactly he is. And I can't really blame anyone for it, since the players are fed a lie about this guy for an extended amount of time, and the truth is kind of a blink and you miss it moment. When Dark Riku arrives in San Francisco, the party concludes that this must be Riku from when Ansem was possessing him during the late game of KH1. It's actually Goofy's fault, it's a rare Goofy L. Can't really blame him either though, I mean it makes sense, or at least as much sense as other things make regarding time travel. The truth, however, is that Dark Riku is the time-traveling heart of the Riku replica in a new replica body. This is quote-unquote revealed to us when, and get ready for this, Riku replica emerges from Riku to attack Dark Riku. Riku says,
"Aren't you my past self? From when Ansem possessed me?"
And Riku replica says,
"No, you beat Ansem and you're still here. This guy is me."
So even Riku himself didn't really know the truth until the very end. And again, it's so easy to miss, and they don't talk about it again after that, so no real shame in thinking the thing you heard for 90% of the time was the truth.
I'm me, he says.
Next up, we have Anti-Aqua. I have my qualms with Anti-Aqua as a plot device, but this isn't really about that. The main debunking target here is that Aqua was, at any point, Norted. This was really a thought that prevailed during the pre-release era for KH3 after the Anti-Aqua trailer, though it seems like some people still think Xehanort had taken hold of Aqua in some form, or that she was going to be one of the 13 vessels. Again, you can't blame anyone too much, it doesn't really help that Anti-Aqua boasts not only yellow eyes, but grayish hair. And I mean, that's what the trailer wanted you to think. It was a shock moment to get people speculating. Now, there is a Famitsu article from this same time period that often gets brought up, which says, "In the darkness, Aqua shoots at Riku and King Mickey. The golden eyes prove that she is under the influence of Master Xehanort." But this is flavor text, not a direct quote from Nomura or anything like that, so I can't really equate yellow or golden eyes to Xehanort influence. Like, he doesn't own the right to yellow eyes. It makes a lot more sense to me to associate yellow eyes with just darkness in general. Heartless have had yellow eyes since the very beginning. Even after Xehanort's demise, Xigbar/Lushu retains yellow eyes. Xehanort himself had silver eyes as a young kid prior to his involvement with darkness. In that same article, an interviewer says Aqua's appearance was also quite a shock. Her eyes now yellow, she really appears to have completely fallen to the darkness. Nomura responds,
"It seems like everyone was blown away, far beyond anything I was expecting. In that scene, King Mickey and Riku are in quite the pinch of a situation, where Aqua then appears in the form we see in the trailer. In KH3, a large amount of characters' problems, Aqua's included, I strive to put to conclusion, so the writing this time was especially tough."
That's all he says about Aqua in that particular interview. Now, there's another interview where the interviewer says, at the end of one of the Kingdom Hearts trailers, Aqua definitely has Xehanort's eyes. We think that signifies that she was corrupted by the realm of darkness since the events of Birth by Sleep. Could you elaborate on that, and can you speak a little bit on what we can expect from Aqua in Kingdom Hearts 3? Nomura responds,
I do know that she is a popular character among her fans. I'm sure many are shocked to see her eyes. People were more shocked than I expected that they would be. I can't really go into much detail about her because I will just spoil everything, but something does happen in Kingdom Hearts 3 that make her seem like how she is right now in the trailer. I think all I can say is that the player is the only one that can save her from him.
So this is really the main point in favor of her being Norted, and I know this isn't going to make people happy, and I know I use Nomura quotes to prove points throughout the rest of this video, but I just don't fully buy this one. To me, it's not entirely explicit enough, and I do think that given how he said this during a pre-release period and not afterwards, I feel like he was intentionally leaving it open to speculation. The interviewer name drops Xehanort, and Nomura, or rather the interpreter, says him, but this could still be ambiguous enough to refer to Ansem SOD when he blasts Aqua into the water at the Dark Margin. Again, I know people might take issue with this one, but I just genuinely don't feel fully convinced that this is 100% what happened. And there's also this idea that Ansem SOD, spontaneously Norted Aqua in the Dark World with the intention of having her as a backup member like Vexen or Demyx, but I don't think Ansem really has the ability to do that, nor do I think it makes sense to leave one of your backups in the Dark World. To me, it seems clear that Aqua's transformation into Anti-Aqua was only ever meant to be representative of her brush with darkness, and I have no real in-game or legitimate, crystal-clear paratextual reasons to believe that it was an intentional possession or attempted possession by Xehanort. At the very least, this has never been clearly outright stated by anyone in-game or anyone responsible for the game's development. But maybe Nomura will come out one day and set the record straight and state that she really was some kind of backup vessel. I won't die on this hill though, because I don't really care.
That settles that.
A more general thing about KH3, this game was not in active development for 13 years. This is mostly something I heard in the aftermath of the game's release, usually by detractors who don't understand how a game with such a long development time could disappoint them so thoroughly. Development for the game was officially announced in June of 2013 at E3, so the earliest we can set the start time is 2012 after the development of Dream Drop Distance. The only thing that goes as far back as 2006 or 7 are ideas and concepts for KH3, not any actual hands-on development. In fact, in 2006, Nomura said that he couldn't even reasonably discuss making a KH3 before finishing work on other projects. When asked about KH3, he said,
"What I can say at this time is, we have various ideas, but we're not at the point where we can say that. Looking at the development schedule, after Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix Plus, the Kingdom Hearts team has Final Fantasy Versus 13 awaiting, so it's physically impossible at the present. I feel that it's not the right time to talk about the future of Kingdom Hearts."
Nomura would go on to say that KH3 was in fact announced too early considering where it stood in development in 2013. And indeed, a development period from 2013 to 2018 when the game went gold is still long, but they also switched engines from Luminous to Unreal Engine 4 partway through. All this to say, KH3 was not in development for 13 years, but something closer to 5 or 6 years. It was never intended to be the very next game after KH2, and we did, in fact, get several games in the interim that would prove to be important to KH3's plot in Days, Birth by Sleep, and Dream Drop Distance.
Too long on the job?
While we're at it, KH3 was also never intended to be the final game in the series. I again recall in the aftermath of 3's release a decent amount of people bemoaning how the game introduced new threads or didn't tie up previous ones and that the series was being milked dry. Say what you will about it being milked dry, but it wasn't like this was first decided in KH3. At no point was it ever advertised or suggested that KH3 would be the absolute final chapter of Kingdom Hearts. As early as 2010, alongside the release of the Birth by Sleep Ultimania, Nomura said that there would be more games post-KH3 and that 3 was only ever meant to serve as the conclusion of the Dark Seeker or Xehanort saga. The reason KH3 may not have felt like a true finale to you is because the people developing it weren't really trying to make it one. Again, say what you will about whether it felt like a good ending for the Xehanort saga, but this complaint was often one made by people who are only tangentially familiar with the series or gaming journalists who aren't worth their salt or any other seasoning for that matter.
I will not allow it to end this way. Not yet.
Might as well stay on the KH3 train, let's talk about Frozen. There's oddly a lot of misinformation surrounding Arendelle's inclusion in KH3. I think one major talking point is that a Frozen world was essentially forced onto Nomura and the development team by Disney because of how massively popular the movie was and they just sorta had to roll with it. That couldn't be further from the truth. Nomura and the developers liked Frozen before it even premiered. Nomura said in a 2018 interview included in the Kingdom Hearts Perfect book,
"Usually when we think about making a game, we choose from works already available to the public. However, for Frozen, when we were selecting the worlds, Disney showed us the preview before it was finished, and we liked it enough to continue the discussion to include it in the game. We decided on the inclusion before the movie was premiered, so we were lucky it was a huge success."
However, there is truth to the Frozen team imposing a lot of restrictions onto the developers, as Nomura said that of all the Disney properties included in KH3, Frozen had the most guidelines. Although these guidelines and restrictions are mostly in reference to visual fidelity. This question was a follow-up on another question about all of the visual guidelines given to the team by the people responsible for Monsters, Inc. Still, it's a fair assumption that there were story and character-related restrictions imposed on the team since, for example, Elsa isn't a party member. In fact, in another interview, when asked if Elsa or Olaf would be joining the party, Nomura said,
"Unfortunately, Elsa and the others will not be fighting. Instead, there are moments, as seen in the trailer, where Marshmallow, the ice monster created by Elsa, will lend their strength."
So that, unfortunately, at the beginning of that answer leads me to assume that it was something the devs wanted but weren't allowed to implement. Beyond this stuff, though, is where we start to get into true conjecture. Anything involving Elsa originally being written as the villain in KH3 and shit like that is all MatPat game theory stuff. Which, that's fine, I don't want to yuck your yums if you like that interpretation, I'm just saying that I've seen this be taken as fact when there's no actual evidence or quote that explicitly spells that out. It is, after all, just a theory. The actual movie went through some iterations where Elsa was written as an antagonist, but was eventually changed to the version we know. We have no way of knowing if Nomura was aware of the original concept for Frozen with evil Elsa.
And I thought the wolves around here were bad.
Perhaps the most painful thing for me to research for this project was, unsurprisingly, KH2 related. A while back on my Twitch channel, we were doing some trivia about summons, and the question came up of whether or not Genie, and by extension Agrabah, was required in any capacity. And we stopped down for minutes to argue about whether or not you could beat KH2, as in defeat Final Xemnus without ever stepping foot in Agrabah. Now, I had grown up assuming, of course not, you need to go there at least once, but the discourse in my chat was shaking my faith. I ran a poll on Twitter sometime after, and the results also did not fill me with confidence. I'm sure I could have found and asked somebody who knows the game better than I do, but I also trust very few people, so I just bit the bullet and ran through the game twice, basically. The first file I loaded up was just after beating Port Royal 1. I then did Halloween Town 1 and was able to go back to Twilight Town and thus on to Space Paranoids, aka I did every first visit besides Agrabah and Pride Lands. After the Battle of 1000 Heartless, I then did the second visits for everything on the right side, Port Royal, and Halloween Town. And after this, you cannot progress further into the story. Agrabah is still untouched and Pride Lands is obscured, so you have to go to Agrabah to progress. Just to be sure, I loaded up a second file in the same spot, but this time did both Halloween Town 1 and Pride Lands 1, and then proceeded to the Hollow Bastion stuff. And like last time, did all of the second visits on the right side, Port Royal, and then Halloween Town. Agrabah is still untouched, and Pride Lands is still obscured despite doing its first visit. Still can't progress. I know this is probably infuriating to even sit through for someone who knows KH2 in the way that I know KH1, but I felt obligated to really make sure on this one since there was at least this much uncertainty about it.
Hi, Sora!
While we're at it, I might as well cover a similar thing with worlds involving KH1. There's some occasional confusion about what Disney worlds you have to do in order to get to Hollow Bastion. The always mandatory worlds are Wonderland, Deep Jungle, Agrabah, and Neverland. For that first circuit, doing Olympus Coliseum changes nothing. You always have to do the other two to progress. Agrabah is always mandatory, Monstro will always swallow you, but you don't have to complete it. Out of Monstro, Atlantica, and Halloween Town, you need to do 2 of the 3 to unlock Neverland. Any combination is fine. And then Neverland is always mandatory. Very open and shut case there.
We can go to other worlds on our vessel.
Here's a somewhat amusing but entirely fabricated misconception. There continues to be this prevailing story about how Nomura either wrote or came up with the idea for Coded while drunk. This one really comes down to folks being too trusting, but it's something that I feel like I remember believing at some point too. It goes all the way back to a Famitsu interview with Nomura and Coded's co-director Hajime Tabata in October of 2007. The earliest English translation I could find is what I believe to be the source of the myth, a khvids.net post from a user named Zalden. The part in question reads as follows. The interviewer asks, "What is the concept for this game?" Nomura says,
"I wanted to make this like a playground for fans. Like Disneyland, where there are many attractions for people. I wish to do the same, but with content instead."
And I can relate to that. I like to think of my channel as a playground of content. Following up on Nomura's answer, Tabata allegedly says,
"Actually, to start it off, Nomura was drunk at midnight, parentheses, oh god, and began to explain the idea with the help of the whiteboard and its contents for the mobile phone. There was a lot of planning going on for that midnight."
So, you know, it just seems like a funny tidbit about the game's origin, although Nomura doesn't comment on this little story in his next answer, so it feels sort of off. And sure enough, if you take the original Japanese text from the Famitsu interview and throw it into Google Translate, there's nothing in there about drinking or being drunk or alcohol or anything like that. Now, the KH Vids post lists both Famitsu and 2chan as sources. We know that the drunk thing didn't come from Famitsu itself, meaning it either had to have been added by someone on 2chan or Zaldin, the original poster of the translation on KH Vids. Given that they haven't posted in over 12 years, I find it unlikely that we could ever ask them, and we'll probably never know the truth about where exactly this came from, but we can at least rest assured that it's
a load of bunk.
Huge thanks to Otto in particular for helping me hunt down the sources I needed for this one.
Sayonara, see you later, go!
Here's something regarding some of the very first playable moments in the series. In Sora's dive to the heart, he's spoken to by some mysterious white text. Later on at the final rest and end of the world, he hears a familiar sounding voice speaking to him again before entering the door to Homecoming. In the last decade or so, a popular interpretation has been that this voice is Ventus speaking to Sora, since we know from Birth by Sleep that Ven's heart is inside him. And while I don't think this makes absolutely zero sense, the Kingdom Hearts 1 Ultimania does state,
"It's the king calling to Sora here. In the dive into the heart, the king guides Sora through his dream, explaining the intentions of the adventure. When Sora acquires the Keyblade for the first time after this, and just before passing through the last door of the end of the world, Sora hears a voice reverberate in him that sounds like the king's. It seems that those around him understand without hearing. The king speaks to Sora's heart directly."
In addition, we know for a fact that the voice speaking to Riku in the Final Mix exclusive scene is Mickey, and that's presented in basically the same style that we see when the voice speaks to Sora. And in fairness, while the Ultimanias themselves are not absolute and ironclad, and the KH1 Ultimania is from a long while ago, nothing has come out stating otherwise about this mysterious voice, and the series-wide Ultimania that released in the run-up to KH3 also reinforces this idea. So it's fairly safe to assume that the voice hasn't been retconned or changed to be Ven or anybody else since then.
That voice. Your Majesty?
Speaking of Ven, let's knock some other contentious ones out of the way. There are conflicting interpretations as to why Roxas is able to dual wield. Half of that reason is obviously Sora, but the other half is sometimes believed to be Xion. However, the Birth by Sleep Ultimania states that Roxas can dual wield
because he can use both Sora's and Ventus's Keyblades. Sora can wield two Keyblades at once because he has Ventus's as well as his own. As Roxas is a part of Sora, he can also use two. In Days, Roxas awakened his ability to dual wield after fighting Xion. In Kingdom Hearts 2, once Sora absorbs him, he can also dual wield. Roxas awakens his ability to dual wield with his will to not forget Xion, who also wielded a Keyblade.
Once again, the Ultimanias are not immune to being incorrect or made obsolete over time, but we haven't been presented with anything else that directly refutes that. And for what it's worth, I can't really blame anyone for attributing half of Roxas's dual wielding ability to Xion. It's not the craziest idea in the world. Staying on that train, is Ven the reason Sora can use a Keyblade at all? To put it simply, no. Once again, it's not a crazy leap in logic. After all, Ven's heart took up residence in Sora's 10 years before the latter first picked up a Keyblade. But there's just nothing anywhere that explicitly states that this is the reason Sora can wield the Keyblade at all, and the games themselves in fact debunk this idea. Since KH1, it's been established that the Kingdom Key, the Keyblade tied to the Realm of Light, was originally intended for Riku. Riku faltered, and the Keyblade passed itself on to Sora, who it recognized as having Strength of Heart. The most crystal clear explanation of this sequence of events is probably best described by young Xehanort in Dream Drop Distance.
The boy chosen by the Keyblade, Riku. It was yours first, wasn't it? But you succumbed to the darkness you could not control, and your prize, the Keyblade, passed on to Sora instead.
And of course, Nomura also outright stated in the Birth by Sleep Ultimania that Sora has inherited nothing from Ven.
One of the concepts behind the KH series is that the main character Sora isn't special, he's just a normal boy. Yes, he does have connections with Ventus's heart among others, but he hasn't inherited anything from them. He's just a normal boy you could find anywhere. I wanted to make Sora a character that the player could take onto themselves and feel like you don't have to be special, but connect to many people and you will realize your secret potential.
That dull, ordinary boy.
There seems to be some occasional confusion about who or what exactly Apprentice Xehanort is, but that one is pretty easily explained. This guy in the white coat who first appears in KH2 is Terra Xehanort. He's just wearing different clothes. Physiologically or metaphysically or whatever, he's the being created at the end of Birth by Sleep when Xehanort takes over Terra's body. In the immediate aftermath, it seems as if Xehanort is fully in control until the lingering will manifests and fights Terra Xehanort. From that point on, Terranort has amnesia, including when Aqua finds him in Radiant Garden. Both Xehanort and Terra's heart struggle with each other during this encounter, and Xehanort attempts to drive the remaining Terra influence out of their shared body by using his Keyblade. Then, later on, when he's found by Ansem the Wise, Terra Xehanort is once again stricken with amnesia. Only remembering the name Xehanort, he elects to go by that during his time as Ansem's apprentice. All this to say, this guy and this guy are the same. You could say they're different people mentally, but pretty much in the same way that my current self would be different from a version of me suffering from a head injury that gave me memory loss. The character files actually lays out this situation pretty well with a chart in the back of the book.
Got you, Xehanort.
Let's just get a recent one out of the way. Prior to the final DLC fighter for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate being announced, many people, including myself, assumed that Sora would be an incredibly far-fetched pick, and we laid the blame at Disney's feet, again assuming that they would be very difficult to work with. And then, obviously, Sora was announced as the last fighter, seemingly against all odds. Some folks may have gone on to assume that Disney really needed their arm twisted by Sakurai in order to make this happen, but Nomura revealed in an interview that he was really the one who was picky and that Disney had basically always been on board for it. I'm sure it was still somewhat tricky to realize and that Disney isn't exactly a walk in the park to work with, but it seems like we can now safely say that Nomura was much more hesitant about the idea than Disney. While we're at it, and this is something I've covered in the past, this interview also spawned the idea that Sora's inclusion in Smash is indicative of his appearance there being canon to the Kingdom Hearts story, but nothing of the sort is said in this interview. At absolute most, Nomura only ever indicates that he was sure to be careful that Sora's inclusion didn't clash with any pre-established lore or continuity in Kingdom Hearts. Here's a minor one that I've had wrong for as long as I can remember. For the life of me, I thought that the height of the organization members' chairs in the throne room was determined by their efficacy in missions or some sort of merit system. But in the KH2 Final Mix Ultimania, when asked if the chair's heights are determined by the members' skills or abilities, Nomura says,
No, the height of the chairs is not fixated, they move. That is to say, the height is up to each person.
So the chair heights are literally, declaratively not tied to anything besides preference, save for Xemnus being the highest as the leader. I know I'm not the only person who thought otherwise, and I think the misconception might stem from the Days multiplayer mode. On the mission results screen, the thrones do indeed adjust in height based on who had the best performance. But as far as I know, this has never been proven to be the case in the actual story.
Hey, don't think I'm not gonna remember that when I'm taller than you!
Another small and sort of pedantic nobody-related thing is, what do you call the opposite of a nobody? Well, a lot of fans, myself included, would usually say somebody when referring to the inverse. For example, Roxas is Sora's nobody, and Sora is Roxas's somebody. However, the term somebody is never actually used this way in-game. In either the game or supplementary materials, the phrases completed being, original self, or other are often used when referring to this concept.
You make a good other.
That is to say, there's no in-universe keyword for beings like Sora or Lee. There is a Chain of Memory scene where Axel says,
"We nobodies can never hope to be somebodies."
Capital N, lowercase s. So I take that as more of a turn of phrase or figure of speech rather than him establishing an identifying word like heartless or unversed. Similarly, there's a part in KH3 where Sora asks the nameless star who did this to her.
Heartless steal hearts? So... a nobody?
Somebody.
Once again, lowercase s, and I don't think the star knows what nobodies even are. When she hears Sora say nobody, she might be thinking of someone with no significance or influence. That all being said, using somebody is once again just useful shorthand and easier to say than the alternatives. I just wanted to point out how it's not technically an official term the series uses.
You're nobodies! You don't even exist!
A much bigger point of confusion surrounding nobodies is their ability, or supposed lack thereof, to grow a heart. Basically, starting with KH2 and especially featured in Days, we're told that nobodies lack hearts and they can't get their own outside of Kingdom Hearts related shenanigans. Kingdom Hearts as in the Big Moon. We learn in Dream Drop Distance from Xemnus that nobodies can in fact regrow their own hearts, something he had known from the beginning.
Indeed. A heart is never lost for good. There may have been variances in our dispositions.
Faster!
But a number of us unquestionably showed signs of a burgeoning replacement. Once born, the heart can also be nurtured. Our experiments creating Heartless were attempts to control the mind and convince it to renounce its sense of self. But understand, one can banish the heart from the body, but the body will try to replace it the first chance it gets, or as many times as it takes. And so I knew, even after we were divided into Heartless and Nobodies, it was just a temporary separation.
A lot of people took this to be a retcon, that the game or its characters were telling us one thing that was true, but that the writing conveniently changed later to reverse this. But there's really nothing about what we were shown or told that should lead us to believe that this was a retcon instead of something that has always been hinted at or planned. From their first appearances, members of the organization do consistently display emotions, especially the Sea Salt trio in Days. They constantly wax poetic about what it could mean to have a heart and how the things they feel, or as they might put it, think they feel or remember feeling, sound awfully similar to what it would be like to have a heart.
Roxas, are you really sure that you don't have a heart?
They clearly feel happiness, anger, and sadness on several occasions long before Xemnus' reveal in Dream Drop. It's always been a part of the story that this one character, whom allies and enemies alike regard as a knowledgeable authority figure, has lied to his underlings for his own benefit. It makes sense that we would go along believing it because his minions are so brainwashed into thinking it's true, they constantly parrot what they were told to believe, despite, constantly demonstrating evidence to the contrary as far back as 2004 or 5. So, I don't know, maybe this one is more up for debate, but I don't think it's fair to say that Nobody's being able to grow hearts is an open and shut case of a retcon. And for the record, the reality of how Nobodies are formed and how they exist in their first moments remains unchanged. They're still born without hearts, and this was never contradicted.
Oh, we do too have hearts. Don't be mad.
This one is fairly obscure, but there's this myth surrounding Twilight Town in KH2 that I've seen brought up constantly since the game released in Japan. Basically, at the Sunset Station area, there's a set of stairs that leads to the Sunset Terrace. Some idiot on a forum named RYYK2005 started this unsubstantiated rumor that the number of steps changes depending on if you're going up or down them. This is pretty easily debunked. There are 16 steps regardless of which way you go.
The rumors were bogus. The end.
Finally, we have the matter of Quadratum to discuss. There's a Wonderland-sized rabbit hole we could go down for this, but this is strictly about its relation to the Shibuya from The World Ends With You, aka there is none. Nomura has said on several occasions, but most recently in a Famitsu article from this spring, that while Shibuya is a part of Quadratum, it has nothing to do with The World Ends With You. When asked if there was a possibility of reuniting with the TWEWY characters who appeared in Dream Drop, Nomura said,
"Strictly speaking, it is a different world from the Shibuya of The World Ends With You. Some fans believe there is a connection to The World Ends With You and Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origins, but there's really no such thing."
See you in Shibuya.
And that'll be where we leave things off for today. This wasn't meant to be a comprehensive and definitive compilation of every single misconception. There are assuredly plenty of things that I didn't think of. There were a few topics that were suggested that I felt either didn't quite fit with what I was going for here, or there just wasn't enough readily available information for me to debunk something with confidence. But I hope you enjoyed either through learning something or feeling vindicated that I've corrected something that you find particularly annoying. And again, I did my best to stick to facts and direct quotes in interviews here, but if I made a mistake or got something completely wrong, let me know. A huge thank you to the names on screen here for helping me talk through a lot of this stuff, helping me gather information, and looking over my script for inaccuracies. And thank you as well to our special guests who so kindly lent their voices to this project. You can find links to all of their own Kingdom Hearts channels or accounts in the description and pinned comment. If you enjoyed, please consider leaving a like and hitting subscribe if you like both long-form Kingdom Hearts content and also don't mind the idea of giving me a small serotonin boost. If you really enjoyed, you may be interested in checking out my Patreon, which is, as always, the best method of supporting my work. Otherwise, I'm on Twitter, I stream on Twitch, and I've got a Discord, all sorts of fun stuff, or you can go to regularpat.com for all of that and more. That's all for me, thanks so much for watching, stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time.